I love the smell of horror movies in the morning. Smells like Professor Victory. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good flavor of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. But basically, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And we've done this many times now, so much so that we've added subgenres to the syllabus in our horror movie supplement found at horrormoviesyllabus.com. And we're looking at one of those subgenres today. We're specifically looking at war horror movies today. And war horror is interesting because there's actually quite a bit of it, but the idea of it being horror is sometimes debatable, and we're going to get into that in this video a little bit. But a lot of war horror is, arguably more drama or even action. And we've talked about war horror on the channel quite a bit, actually. We've talked about movies like 28 Days Later or Predator or Dog Soldiers, things with the military aspects to them. And even movies like Pan's Labyrinth or Devil's Backbone or almost anything we've talked about with Del Toro has like a war backdrop to it. So we've covered a lot of these kinds of movies already on the syllabus. And as you know, we're not going to repeat movies that we've done previously. So we're going to be talking about new movies that we haven't talked about on the channel before. And honestly, that's fine because there are, like I said, plenty to go around. There's so many war horror movies that fit into other subgenres as well. There's so many Nazi zombie movies that I gave them their own subgenre, basically. They're just, so we're not going to be talking about things like Overlord today, just so you know, because there's just so many different kinds of war horror movies, and it's hard for me to figure out what exactly it was that I wanted to talk about here. But I think what I want to focus on is the horror of war. Both in terms of allegorical horror and in terms of like actual war horrors. So we'll be looking at movies that have kind of an allegorical bent to them, kind of an illustration of why war is terrible or how war makes us monsters and things like that, using horror tropes as the allegory. But we're also going to look at a couple of movies that are admittedly arguably more drama than horror. Like I said, movies that really demonstrate the actual horrors of war, real life horrors of war. So we're going to be a little bit all over the map here, but I think it'll kind of come together nicely. At least I hope so. And if nothing else, we've got great movies to talk about today. Pretty much everything that we're going to discuss today is quality stuff, worth your time, excellent movies. I would endorse all of them. I'm telling you that right up front. So we're going to have a good video. And we're going to categorize the movies like we always do, undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate level. And in this case, I think we're going to go with increasingly heavy and dark films. As we go on, the movies will get a little bit more tough to watch in terms of theme and subject matter, frankly. So that'll be fun. But stick with us; it's going to be worth it. So let's go ahead and roll on out to check out these war horror movies. The first war horror movie we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is Death Dream. Death Dream came out in 1974 and is also sometimes called Dead of Night, though I'll be honest with you, neither of those titles really seems to do the movie justice. Neither of them seem to fit the tone or story going on in this movie. The movie is directed by Bob Clark of Black Christmas fame and is an anti-war sentiment film, which is kind of par for the course for a lot of these movies. And we're going to get into it a little bit more in terms of the specifics of it. But if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young soldier who gets killed in Vietnam, serving his country, and comes back home alive. Basically, his mother has wished hard enough for him to come back home alive, and he actually does so. But he is definitely different. Something's definitely not right. And his father can tell that there's something off, but the relationship between father and son is not great. And the mother's having none of it because she's just happy to have her son home. Family hijinks abound, and things start to get really ugly as our returning soldier has to kill to survive. But we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for anybody. And the movie is an interesting trip. First of all, like I mentioned before, it's directed by Bob Clark, and so it's got a certain pace to it that is slow and foreboding and building. And arguably some people might feel like it's a little too slow, especially early on. But I would quibble with that because I think what Clark has done here is build into a war horror movie, a real true family drama, a dysfunctional family drama movie, which is where this movie could also fit in the dysfunctional family subgenre. And in fact, arguably more so than a war horror because the movie's light on war scenes. The movie opens in war scenes. And there's there's a little bit more, but that's basically it. It's mostly the aftermath or the effect of war on a soldier and on a family, and that's really why I wanted to include it here because I liked that it showed that aspect of things. So many war horror movies are focusing on the actual war atrocities, what's actually happening, the action and the violence and stuff in wartime or with the soldiers. And this one opted to go a different route and go for the aftermath, going for a soldier returning home and how that affects the family and how the loss of a soldier can affect the family. And I liked that angle. That was actually one of the best things about the movie. And it's helped by the fact that the family's given pretty strong performances across the board. Most notably, John Marley, who's a recognizable actor, has been in a lot of TV stuff, done some Cassavetes movies, and he is the dad playing it really great. He's got a drinking problem. He's got family issues. His marriage is a little rocky. His relationship with his kids very rocky, but he's actually right, and it makes for an interesting dynamic that he's not the most likable character. You're not really on his side, but he is right, and so that adds a certain layer to the movie where you're kind of on his side or rooting for him, even though he's kind of a jerk. And then the mother is actually the nice one, but she's also the one who's being blissfully ignorant of the situation going on. And the family dynamics there is great. Seeing the sister struggle to connect with her brother again and trying to reintegrate him into the friendships and stuff that he's left behind. And he's so disconnected and out of it and ultimately homicidal because he's become essentially a monster. I'm maybe slightly spoiling the movie a little bit, but it's kind of obvious from the get-go where it's going. It's really interesting to see the degradation of the soldier, but more importantly, the reactions of his family as they kind of blind themselves to those changes, to that degradation, and try to make everything business as usual, make everything be just like it was, but he is forever changed. And it's a very obvious anti-war sentiment, an anti-war allegory of what happens to soldiers, what war does to somebody psychologically. It really is a psychological horror in that sense. And that's maybe my knock on it, is that it's very psychological and could maybe benefit from being a little bit more gratuitous in terms of the violence, a little bit more exploitative. That's a minor nitpick. It does have its scenes of gore that are pretty good, and some scares, and that third act really ramps up a bit and makes things a lot more interesting in terms of action, things happening on camera. But for me, the meat and potatoes is the family dynamic. It really is the family relationships. It's the story that Bob Clark's trying to tell, and he's telling it well. I think it's a fresher take on war horror than we usually see, and I appreciated that, especially watching a bunch of these for the channel. Watching this one is kind of refreshing. It's a different take on things, and one that's welcome, at least for me. Like I said, I do think it leaves a little bit on the table in terms of some gore and maybe even a little bit in terms of coming together for its storyline. It's got this family dynamic thing, and it doesn't ever really completely land the final punch. But that's a minor nitpick. Like I said, the movie's really, really good, and it's doing something really, in my mind, kind of unique and interesting. Even if it's not nailing it 100%, I'm still pretty enthusiastic about it, and I'm still very satisfied with what I'm being given here. The movie does have a bit of a reputation amongst the horror community for being a good war horror movie, so it's not like it's the most unknown one, but it seems like this movie has kind of faded away a bit. People haven't really, they're not talking about it as much as they used to, it seems. So I wanted to kind of shine a little bit of a light on it and bring it to your attention in case you hadn't seen it. Because if you haven't, I definitely think it's worth your time. Definitely think it's worth checking out. Like I said, a bit of a slow burn, so might not be for everybody, but definitely a quality film that deserves to be seen and deserves to be talked about. And if you have seen it, let's talk about it because I may not be in the majority on this opinion. Maybe there's a lot of people that don't feel it's as good as I think it is, but I think it's an excellent film made by an excellent filmmaker who's done his job very well and delivered the message he wants to. I think it resonates. I think it hits pretty hard, and I think you should check it out. The next movie that we're talking about today, The Graduate Level Selection, is The Third Part of the Night. The Third Part of the Night came out in 1971 and is the feature film debut of director Andrzej Zulawski, who is probably not pronouncing his name the way I'm pronouncing it right now. My Polish is a little bit rusty, but he is the director of Possession, which we've talked about on the channel, and it is a fantastic movie. And this is his first feature, and it's a pretty interesting watch just because of that, but also because of what's going on in the movie. If you haven't seen it before, the movie takes place in Nazi-occupied Poland during World War II and follows the story of a man whose wife and child and mother are killed by Nazis. So he joins a underground Nazi resistance force who is trying to infiltrate a Nazi experiment involving lice, which is actually something that was really happening. And we'll get more into that as we go on, but I don't want to spoil things too much for you because it's a bit of a wild movie. And with Zulawski, you'd kind of expect that. If you've seen Possession, you kind of know what I'm talking about here because the dude's weird, man, and he tells some weird stories. And the Third Part of the Night is just like that. It's a very avant-garde is the word I think it's used a lot to describe it. I'd say nightmarish and a little bit surreal. It really is kind of a trip of a movie. It's like, narratively speaking, there is a through line there. There is a story that can be followed, but it's kind of dreamlike and a little bit jumpy, and the narrative you can kind of lose the thread every once in a while. And there's things like doppelgangers in there, and it's addressed in the movie. It's not like they're just kind of throwing it out there, but it is kind of hard to follow. You really have to pay attention to it, and I can't sit here in good conscience and tell you that paying attention to it and really following through is going to pay off. The narrative goes into some really strange places, and really, I can't sit here and tell you that it completely coalesces into something narratively satisfying. But again, if you've seen Possession, you kind of know what you're in for because what you see here are the bones of Possession. It's not the same movie, it's not the same story or anything like that. But you can see Zulawski has a style here. He has a kind of a vibe that he's going for, a mood, if you will. And if you like Possession, there's a good chance you're going to like this too. Now, let me be clear. Possession is the better movie. But I do think that this one is very interesting as a kind of a precursor to that movie. To see Zulawski's kind of, coming of age in terms of being a feature film director, it's really, really good. Like visually, it's striking, and story-wise, like I said, hard to follow, but it was fascinating to find out that this is real stuff. I like movies that make me look things up afterwards because I want to see how real they were. And this is one of those movies. And the experiment with the lice, trying to use lice, kind of trying to weaponize them and things like that, is real. That's a real thing that was happening. I guess Zulawski's father was involved in the research in this back in the day in Poland before the Nazis came in. So he was drawing on stuff that he knew something about, and it's wild. And the lice stuff is, honestly, it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross stuff, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see just the weird things that were being done in the name of war, in the name of science. It's kind of wild stuff, and it fits perfectly into this movie. In fact, that's why I had to look it up because this movie is, it's out there. It's kind of weird. And so this would, be very easy to just be some sort of weird, bizarre thing that Zulawski just kind of made up for the story. But no, this is a real thing. And it adds so much to the movie for me to see like this kind of slice of the World War II that you don't usually see. First of all, seeing these underground resistance fighters, not like soldiers, but like an underground movement trying to oppose the Nazis by kind of infiltrating their scientific experiments. It's fascinating. Really good stuff. The performances across the board are very good. Haunting. The movie has a haunting vibe to it. Again, if you've seen Possession, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. And it's rougher than Possession. It's a little unpolished compared to Possession, but I kind of like that about it because, war is kind of gritty and dirty, and that's kind of how this movie feels a little bit. It feels a little bit like a first-time director, but one that's got immense talent, one that has just a vision and knows what he wants to do and has a confidence that's shining through, even if the movie is a little rough around the edges. And it shows you what he would be able to pull off in Possession so well later on, just a couple years later. It makes for a really great psychological war horror movie that is very psychological, surreal, dreamlike, nightmarish. All these words come to mind because it's such a trip of a movie. And if you can just get on board and go for the ride, I think you're going to have a good time. Again, especially if you like Possession. Again, not going to be for everybody. If you don't like Possession, maybe don't check this one out. It's probably not going to be for you. But I think this movie is wonderful. I think it's a gorgeous movie. I think it's just really cool to see Zalowski doing his first time thing and really maybe not knocking it completely out of the park, but really, really solid, good work for a first time director. And just this, again, kind of this precursor to what would come later on. Wild story, kind of heartbreaking story. It starts out pretty heartbreaking and it doesn't really get more uplifting than that. So it's bleak. And a lot of what we're talking about today is bleak. Very, very little uplifting stories today. But it's definitely one that needs to be seen. And it's one that I don't see people talking about that much. It's funny. Zalowski's, Possession gets talked about quite a bit in the horror community, but this one, not so much. And it's absolutely one that should get talked about more because it is excellent. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. Let me know what you think here on the comments. But if you have seen it, let me know what you think of it because I'm super high on this one. I think it's a work of art, frankly, and I'd like to know if everybody else is seeing things my way. And the last war horror movie we're looking at today, the postgraduate level selection, is Come and See. Come and See came out in 1985 and is arguably more of a drama than a horror movie. In fact, that is a common debate whether or not this movie is actually a horror movie. And I obviously am falling on the horror side of the debate, but I also feel like I can see the drama aspect of it because it kind of reminds me a little bit in some ways of Apocalypse Now, which is, by the way, a movie that I strongly considered putting into this video and ultimately decided not to because it's just so mainstream, well known as a war drama that I decided to let it go. But I decided to go with Come and See instead because it's amazing. And if you haven't seen it, you should absolutely see it. If you haven't seen it, the movie is a Russian film about the Nazis basically destroying Belarusian villages, and it follows a 14-year-old boy who joins the Belarusian partisans resistance force to fight the Nazis, and basically shows the entire movie through his eyes and the horrors of war that he's subjected to, and it is absolutely heartbreaking because it is absolutely real. And that is a rough watch. I don't want to spoil it too much, but gonna kind of have to give you the heads up on this one. It's a rough watch and it has a reputation for being a rough watch, a reputation that might be a little misleading, especially if you're expecting a horror movie. I think that a lot of people are expecting this movie, and I was one of them before I saw it, to be really gory and upsetting and violent. And it has some of that stuff in it. But that's not why it has the reputation that it has. It's not like the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, which, by the way, could also make for a war horror movie, if we're being honest. It's not really like that in terms of what you're going to see. What it is really the reality of the situation, both in terms of the fact that you're seeing real events that actually happen and also just like the reality of the humanity of what's going on is what really resonates, and it resonates hard. Now, the key to this is Russian actor Alexei Kravchenko, and I'm probably messing that name up pretty good because my Russian's a little bit rusty. He gives an amazing performance. He's the 14-year-old boy, and he, at the time, was not an actor. He became a rather good actor, and you can see the start of it here in this movie. He's absolutely fantastic, giving you a very raw, realistic performance. And doing the research on this movie, read about how they took great care of him on set to make sure that he wouldn't be traumatized by making this movie. They did a really good job of trying to make sure that he could deliver the performance that was necessary, be exposed to the things he was going to be exposed to, and not lose lose his mind, frankly. And thank God he didn't. He's gone on to have a very good career, apparently. I'm not really familiar with his other work, but he is incredible here. Just his face, the close-ups on his face as he's progressively going through this horror, and just having this world stripped away from him and being exposed to these really awful things. And he goes from being a true child to at the very end when he's interacting with other children that are children and he is not a child anymore. And it's absolutely heartbreaking and wonderful. The movie is beautifully shot. It's beautifully shot, even when you're watching horrible things on there. It's gorgeous. It's a beautifully shot film. And it's got this kind of surreal or really even more hyper real aspect to it. I've been throwing the words dreamlike around a lot in this video, and this one kind of has that same feeling, but it also has a way of putting you into the movie very realistically. And the audio, the sound design in this movie is fantastic. At some point, our lead character has hearing loss, and the sound design mimics that, so you can kind of feel the way he feels in it. And the way that it switches from being kind of languid and beautiful and surrealistic or hyper realistic to being this like gritty realistic, like seamlessly without you even realizing it. You suddenly realize you're in this horrible situation, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Now, I keep talking about the reality of it, and part of it. What I'm talking about is, like I said, that humanity of a child having to witness these things, seeing all these people suffering these true things that happened, and being brutalized or murdered or tortured or whatever. It's awful. But the other part of this is that this is something, again, a little lesser known part of World War II. These Belarusian villages that were torched, burned down the ground, people murdered, and in particular the specific actions of the Nazis and what they did to these people. Like the stuff you see in this movie are real anecdotes. Like the story itself, the 14-year-old boy is not following a specific boy. But the actions that happen in here are real. People being thrown into the barn so that they can be burned alive in the barn. Real. Nazi soldiers letting people go if they would leave their kids to burn. Real. Women being dragged into trucks to be sexually assaulted. Real stuff. And while it's not like graphically showing you like burning bodies or women being raped or whatever, it's kind of leaving it off screen and like to your imagination to a degree. That almost makes it worse because it's real, because this really happened. And that's what makes this movie hit so hard. That's what gives it its notoriety, its reputation. The movie is a heartbreak. Like I said, Apocalypse Now is what kind of made me think of this, because they both had this kind of like surreal, allegorical, and like almost like poetic, like feel to them. But I think Apocalypse Now comes off a little bit more war, actiony almost, or that's not the right word, but it doesn't have the same sense of sorrow and tragedy that Come and See has. And Come and See, again, not quite as famous as Apocalypse Now by any stretch of the imagination, but is a well-known movie. But I had to put it on here. I debated whether or not it belonged here because, like I said, not everybody feels like it's a horror movie, but the horrors in this movie are real and feel like it needed to be talked about. And it's an amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, it's not gonna be for everybody, man. It's a tough watch. I'm not gonna lie, but it's kind of an important movie. And the performance of Kravchenko is amazing. The camera work, the cinematography, filmmaking is just on point. It's just a wonderful, wonderful movie, but it's a hard watch. So use your judgment. But if you do check it out, let me know what you think, because it's definitely an excellent movie. I just felt like I had to bring it up and talk about it. So those are our selections for the war horror movie subgenre. But of course, I've got a few extra credit movies for you. Like I said, there's a lot of quality movies in this subgenre, so there was a lot to choose from. So I picked three that I particularly like, and hopefully you will check them out and like them too. The first one we're going to talk about is Trench 11. Trench 11 came out in 2017 and is a Canadian movie, but it is about World War II. It is about the Nazis, as so many of these movies are. But I felt like this movie had a little bit more of a fresh or interesting take, and kind of an interesting story to tell, or an interesting like niche aspect of warfare. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a tunneler who is engaged by the military to basically explore and discover what is going on in these German Nazi tunnels. In particular, this secret hidden lab that they found in there. They call it Trench 11 because it's 11 miles behind enemy lines, and they want to know what's going on there. And turns out what's going on there are some very creepy experiments that are leading people to be basically consumed by parasites and turned into monsters, for lack of a better word. But we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for anybody. But what I liked about this was the tunneling aspect of it. The angle of a tunneler who's going in there to try to find the Nazi lab felt a little bit fresher, because then the Nazi lab, Nazi experimentation is not exactly the most original story plot point. We've actually talked about it just in this video alone. But the idea of the tunneler aspect and having it being underground was kind of a fresh take for me, and you kind of understand like the dangers of the tunneling and what's entailed in that. And it also gave the movie a really fun claustrophobic feel to it. You're now in confined spaces, and you're not easily getting out of things. You can't stretch your legs. You can't just walk away. You're really committing to your mission at that point. I liked that angle to it. I thought that was a really fun, fresh idea. Apparently, this movie was part of the After Dark Film Festival, which I've talked about before on the channel, and we will be talking about quite a bit in the future on the channel. And these are often movies that I find to be kind of surprising hidden gems. Movies that don't seem like they get a whole lot of press, a whole lot of play, but wind up being really quality, at least in my experience of why I'm a fan of them. And this one is no exception to the rule. I really liked the main characters. In fact, I liked all of the characters. I felt like they did a pretty good job of assembling this fun group of soldiers that are going on this mission, who have their relationships and their clashes, that the personality mix worked really well to drive the story forward. You had people you liked, people you didn't like. You also had some compelling villains. Nazis are always an easy villain, and you've seen a lot of the movies we talked about today have Nazis as the villain, but they give these ones kind of a fun, maniacal bent to them that, it doesn't glorify Nazis. They're still bad guys here, but they made them entertaining villains to watch instead of being upsetting things to watch, like, and say, come and see. This movie's a lot more fun than that movie, much more enjoyable and a lot more popcorn type flick. So kind of a good palate cleanser if you want to stay on theme, but watch something to bring you up a little bit after Come and See. This is not a bad choice. I definitely say that this is a good time. If you like war horror movies, this is a good one to watch. This one's fitting squarely into that war horror subgenre. It really does have the horror elements in it. So I would recommend it. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And if you have seen it, not a lot of people have, I don't think. It doesn't seem like it has a big reputation, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, of course, because obviously I'm pretty high on it. Are you? The next extra credit movie I want to mention is a movie called R Point. R Point came out in 2004 and is a South Korean horror film, and it's well established on this channel how much I enjoy South Korean horror, and R Point is not going to be an exception to that rule. I really enjoy this movie. It's a kind of a fresh take on a Vietnam story and a cool ghost story at the same time, and all the elements are working together really well to make for a really entertaining movie. If you haven't seen it before, the movie follows a South Korean troop in Vietnam who's been tasked with finding a missing unit that has sent messages, and they're supposed to be dead, but they are sending messages via radio, so they've been sent in to find them. They track them down to this odd building out in the middle of the jungle that seems to be deserted, but they keep running into mysterious, creepy things, and it starts to have an effect mentally on the soldiers, and things start to happen. Hijinks start to abound. Things go very south very fast. But we'll stop there so as to not spoil it for you, of course. But this movie is cool for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's South Korean, and not only am I saying that because that means it's a good quality filmmaking, but also because seeing South Koreans in Vietnam, fighting in Vietnam, is interesting to me. I don't usually see that in my Vietnam movies. I don't know much about it. And again, it's the kind of thing that makes me look things up, makes me want to figure out how much of it's real. And I liked that was an interesting angle that I hadn't seen before. It felt fresh to me. I also like the casting in this one. Kind of like in Trench 11, they've assembled a group of soldiers that play off each other very well. They're likable, they're interesting characters, they're caricatures to some degree, but they're fun ones. They're ones you're relating to, you're investing in. So when things start going bad and things start happening to these guys, you actually care about that, and I think that's important. But then it's also a traditional kind of ghost story on top of that with some other elements that I don't want to mention specifically here because I don't want to spoil the movie too much to you. But, suffice to say, South Koreans have a nice tendency of blending different subgenres together to make something that feels wholly unique and Korean. And they've done so here too. Maybe not to the same degree as some of the other South Korean horror movies that we've looked at before. But, it's not just a war horror movie and it's not just a ghost story. It's got a few other elements too, but they weave together so nicely to come together and feel like something new, something that congeals really, really well. And it's got some very fun twists. Again, I'm not going to spoil things for you, but I do like some of the twists, some of which maybe are a little bit telegraphed, maybe, but I do like the places the story goes and the surprises that it delivers. It keeps things fresh and moving. It's got a mystery that's set up that I felt was compelling right from the jump. And as the movie went on, I just got more and more drawn into it. And as they make these discoveries and find things out, it just added to the dread, added to the mystery, added to the excitement. Everything worked really, really well in this movie. Now, of course, it is subtitled, it's in Korean. So there is that. I know some of you feel like that kind of undercuts the scariness of it, and I wouldn't go so far as to say this movie is super scary. So much as more is it's a little on the disturbing side. It's got a little bit of like psychological terror to it, but overall it's not. It's got some gore in it and stuff like that, but it's not come and see. It's not going to upset you like that. It's another good time ride. It's another creepy story, and it's just really, really well made. I can't praise it highly enough. I do love Korean horror movies, and I love the way they blend these subgenres together. And this is a good example of it. So if you're looking for something that feels a little bit fresh and a little bit different when it comes to war horror, this is one to check out for sure. And of course, if you do, come back in the comments and let me know what you thought of it. And the last war horror movie I'm going to mention today for extra credit is Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers came out in 1997. It's directed by Paul Verhoeven, who did RoboCop and Total Recall and Showgirls. But he is an excellent director, and he is showing off what he's known for in this movie. And I'll be honest, I couldn't resist putting this movie on here. It's definitely different tonally by far to all of the other movies we just talked about. It almost doesn't really fit or belong, but I couldn't help it. I wanted to end on kind of a funner note, and I wanted to end on something that was kind of lighthearted and schlocky, and this is the movie, and it's a great one if you haven't seen it before. And if you haven't, the movie is a story of three friends in a future world that is kind of a weird fascist utopia, if you will, and we're being attacked by alien creatures, alien insect-like creatures, and these three friends sign up for the military to go and fight off this alien invasion, and the whole movie really winds up being a satire on fascism and war, and a biting commentary while also being a really fun popcorn flick. I won't spoil anything for you, of course, but the movie does a really great job of both delivering a fun war action movie and also mocking fun war action movies at the same time. And it does it really, really well. It's got these great effects, both practical and CGI, that have held up remarkably well over the years, all things considered. And it really, like most Verhoeven works do, really leans into the gore. Just shocking violence. Really grotesque, shocking violence, over the top, played for laughs, really, just to kind of like break that tension. And it all just feeds into Verhoeven's obvious commentary about war being awful and the politics of war, the propaganda of war. It really hammers that point home really, really hard. And it's funny because that's what makes the movie so noteworthy. That's what makes the movie so important and interesting and fun and worth watching. And yet it's also what I feel like tanked it at the box office, because the movie wasn't marketed as this satire, this like satire on fascism. It was really marketed as a straight, funny war horror, or not even funny, a straight fun war horror movie. And then it winds up being this other thing that I don't think people saw coming, and it did not go over well. People hated this movie. I remember when this movie came out, people did not want to go see it. It bombed badly, but not so much so that they couldn't get like a direct-to-video franchise out of it. There were other movies, diminishing returns, of course, but it's funny to me that this movie did find its audience eventually, and is now viewed with a better critical lens. People see now what Verhoeven was trying to do. I think people tried to take it seriously when it's so obviously tongue-in-cheek and over the top. And that works to the movie's advantage too, because let's be honest, some of the actors in here, specifically Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards, not great actors, man. They're not very good, but their wooden acting fits this movie extremely well. It just adds a layer of like hilarity to it because this world is hyper real. It's played really large, really big, and really tongue in cheek, and it nails it. Neil Patrick Harris steals some scenes in this movie. That was like right before his real big comeback after being a child actor. So that's a little noteworthy as well. But this movie, if you've never seen this movie, you should absolutely check this out. Like I said, it's gory. It's very gory, so be aware of that. But it is hilarious and fun and action-packed and actually makes some really interesting commentary. Like, as the movie goes on, you just see the fascism, the allegories more and more and more till by the end you start to really question, like, wait, whose side are we supposed to be on in this movie? And that's just great. That's Verhoeven at his best. It's not as good as RoboCop, I'm not saying that, but it really is up there. It really is a fun movie that gets a little underlooked, and is only now just starting to get its reputation as being a true classic like it is. So I had to mention it. Had to bring it in here. I'm betting a lot of you have seen it, so feel free in the comments to let me know if you agree or disagree with my opinion on that. But to me, I had to cap us off with something that was a little bit more fun. So that's going to do it for our exploration of war horror, and hopefully you did have fun with this, because I did. Even though, like I said, a lot of these movies are more drama than horror, and some of the subject matter pretty heavy, not stuff to be taken lightly, but I think the movies are quality. I think every single movie we talked about today, definitely worth your time, definitely worth checking out, and definitely worth us having conversations about in the comments below. So please, by all means, let's continue the conversation there. And now let's continue by looking at a horror Trivia Pursuit card, because it's that time where I like to ask a question here on camera and then try to answer it. And I'm going to go with the international category, because several of the movies that we talked about today are actually international films, foreign films. So let's go with that. And our question today is: after surgery restores her sight in 2002's The Eye, what is protagonist Mun able to foresee? Okay, this is a pretty good question. A, because they didn't give me multiple choice, and you know how I've been feeling about that lately. But B, because I think this is a good one. Like, if you've seen the movie, you should theoretically know the answer to this one. It's not super hard in that sense, but it's like one of those things where if you haven't seen the movie, you might have to try to figure out and guess. And based simply on the title alone, you might be able to kind of figure that out. I know the answer. I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I'm like 95% sure I know the answer. And I'm just glad it wasn't like a name question. Like, I'm glad they didn't ask the name of the main character, because Mun apparently is his name. I would not have remembered that in the slightest. But I do think I know the answer. I'm proud to give you guys a little bit of answer that I don't think we've talked about the Eye yet on the channel. I'm almost positive we haven't talked about it yet, but we're gonna. That's a movie that's going to be discussed. I'm almost positive about that. But there's been so many videos on the channel now, it's starting to get hard to remember, to be honest with you, without looking at my notes. So that's kind of cool. Thanks to you guys for watching and keeping this thing going. So I think I've prattled on long enough. I'm going to give my answer, so lock your answer in. And my answer is, she was able to see like future deaths. Like that she could like see how how deaths were going to happen. That's my answer. So let's see if the card says I'm right. Death. It just says death. So yeah, so I was right on that one. I figured I remembered that one pretty well. And yeah, I've seen the movie. I've seen the remake of the movie. And yeah, have we talked about it? Maybe we've talked about the remake. We might have talked about the remake of the movie. But anyways, did you guys get that question right? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But let me know in the comments below. And if you didn't get it right, let me know if you had any funny answers, because we haven't done that in a while because of all these stupid multiple choice questions. I haven't heard any funny original answers. So if you have a funny answer that you had that was wrong, leave it in the comments below so we can all have a good laugh about it. But next week, we'll be doing something completely different. I hope you enjoyed the things this week. I'm glad you stick till the end. Until next week, I'll just say, class dismissed.